So we're going to talk about the blame game. I usually set that up saying what's the most important game that's on TV, or what's the one that people refer to. You think Monopoly or all the other games, but you know the blame game's been going on for a long time. As we get started, I want to tell you this little book out there is for sale, and I don't really want the money for the book necessarily. It just costs $10 to get it here and shipped in. But this book is revolutionary in personal accountability. How many of you think we're losing personal accountability in our society a little bit today? Yeah, so this book, QBQ, The Question Behind the Question, is a great book to read and just accept your responsibility and move it on forward. You know, the blame game's been going on for longer than we've been alive. We all feel it, and it's just destroying relationships every day. So today, we're going to come up with some solutions for the blame game. You know, I could say that blame is part of our spiritual DNA. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of Yahweh is, what's good, acceptable, and perfect." Now, I'm not going to pretend to know everything that Yahweh has in His will for you today, but what I will tell you is there's a few attitudes that Yahweh has that He does not want you to have. Number one of those, or at least one of those things, maybe not number one, I don't know how He categorizes that, but He does not want us to be blamers. I can tell you that much, all right? So, not in the will of Yahweh is that we're not supposed to be blamers, and that's the subject for today. Whose fault is it anyway? Whose fault is it? Who are we going to blame for it? I want to get to know you all a little better. Would you like to know your neighbor a little bit better with me today? Oh, come on. You want to know who's sitting beside you? You might have been hanging out with them for a long time. Maybe you don't have as much insight as you need to have around you. Maybe they're just new to the conference. And they're new to you, so you don't know. So let's go. Sometimes we do this little exercise at our Marriage Ignited seminars, and it gets a little truth out in your personality. So how many of you, when you're dealing with a problem or a discussion, you tend to be a pouter? And so maybe it's not the question intended for you. If you know someone who's a pouter or any of these little attributes, you can just point. It's pretty, well, it might be counterproductive, but it will be insightful. How many of you pout when you're going through some kind of a little confrontation or system at home, and you know, if your husband or wife would look at you and say, "Yeah, you just tend to be a little pouter, kind of babyish." How many of you are a shouter if you're going through a problem? Don, that was pretty fast. I think that's the fastest I've ever seen a hand go up. You guys think that's true? Don is a shouter? You guys ever heard him shouting? Anybody think that their voice being loud is the one thing that's going to resolve the problem? Who's that? I see some fingers being pointed now. I won't hold any names. I'll protect the guilty. How many of you, when you're dealing with something really strongly, you want to be a withdrawer? You just pull back and say, "I'm going to take about 6 months to settle this thing in my own mind, then I'll come back and talk to you." Or the stewers, you ever seen the stewers? When they get into some little tight spot or something, they sit down, and I mean, you can almost see the steam coming up off of their head. They're not saying anything, but it's like, you know, it's cooking. You know it's going. It's like getting ready to explode. What about the schemers? The schemers, I love the schemers, you know, because they're always thinking. They're always thinking, "Yeah, they said that to me, but I'll figure out my way. In a couple of weeks, they won't know what hit them." Right? You guys act like you know that pretty well. Is that you laughing for yourself or the other partner? And James already talked about this morning, but the silent. How many of you like the silent treatment? How many of you believe that if you're just quiet and you just put this unbelievable pressure to where you're not going to release your voice for the other person for a while, you think that's going to solve the problems that you have in your relationship? Anybody ever done that? Like you just sit down, "I won't talk to you till you come talk to me." They're going to come to me, right? Yeah. How many of you tend to blame someone in a tight situation when you feel like somebody's really pointed you out? Anybody in there ever blamed anybody? You guys are liars. And there's a few honest ones, and those hands were high, but I didn't see it. So let's just go ahead and raise our hand. We like to blame. Let's just face it. Let's face this head on. That's really the first step to recovery, is to face the truth about what it is. You know, the blame game started a long time ago. Like I said, it's in our spiritual DNA. In Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and 3, when creation was made, it tells about how Adam was made, and we are in his image. We weren't created to be alone. He gave us a woman. And at the end of that I think the second chapter, it says that there was harmony in paradise. The man and the wife were both naked, and they felt no shame, innocence, peace, tranquility. If we could just get back to the Garden of Eden, I hear people say all the time, right? Everything's going to be okay. But it doesn't take long in a marriage for all this to go awry. In the next few chapters, we get something that's played out generation after generation after generation after generation after generation after generation, all the way to today, to you and me. And it's blame. So when Yahweh come to account, what happened? He said, where are they at? They're hiding. The first thing we get is that they're hiding. They're trying to stay away from the conversation altogether, right? They don't want to go through this because they know they haven't even experienced what's going to happen, but they know it's not good. So then what happens? Adam blames Eve and Yahweh for this woman you created. I mean, it also says that when man finds a wife, he finds a good thing, but not when it goes awry. We find someone to blame our problems on sometimes. Eve blames the serpent, and the serpent really reveals the weakness in our hearts, and the serpent's already been working all through this whole thing to try to get us to blame Yahweh for everything that's going wrong, so that he can put a disparity in our heart. And in our relationships, I think one thing, if you talk to any marriage counselor, anywhere, anytime, when they deal with a married couple, one of the things that they have to get past if they're going to have success in what they're counseling is to get them to stop blaming the other spouse and begin to pick up the page of personal responsibility. In this book, QBQ, I love this book. I'm telling you, it's so easy. The chapters are like a page and a half. There's 75 of them, but they're only a page and a half. He tells a story. He's sitting on an airplane one day, and you can read the book and get the real story. I'll tell you my version of it. So he's sitting on an airplane one day, and he's having a conversation with someone. This guy goes around the country, and he gives us seminars on personal accountability, and he ends up sitting beside this guy that's as they talked, he learned he was a personal injury attorney. Now, a personal injury attorney, you know what he does. He goes out there and tries to find people who have had other people wrong them, and then even through whatever the court system, he tries to get money. So they're having this conversation, and so he finds out he's a personal injury lawyer, and he says, well, what do you do? He says, well, I give seminars. He said, oh, yeah, and so half time goes on. What kind of seminars do you give? And he says, well, I give seminars about personal responsibility. And he says, oh, that's good. And he thought, I think I'll just keep this going a little bit longer. So they talked a little bit. He says, I wonder if this guy's figuring it out. And he said he went a little bit more, and he asked him, and he said, well, this is what I do, is I go teach people how to get out of victim mentality. And he said at that point, the guy just looked around, a couple more little words, and then it was silence the whole rest of the flight. And that's what happens when someone brings up accountability, when someone loves to blame. So whose fault is it in a way? You're blaming when it began, and I want to tell you, you're all blamers. So it's just a matter of how you control it to make it worse, because our natural reaction as human tendency is to be blamers. You're blaming when it began. It was probably an innocent defense mechanism meant to protect you from harm. If your sister was to blame for eating the cookies, then she would be punished, not you, if you blamed her. Sometimes blaming, though, takes a turn toward the dysfunctional. And when blaming gets so much inside of a marriage from a husband or a wife, it begins to do some real harm. When blaming becomes your default, it will cause harm to you and others. And we try to protect ourselves, and this is kind of a protective mechanism, this blaming thing, to shift the responsibility off of us and put somebody else at fault. Because if we're not at fault, then we can feel better about ourselves. But the trouble is it's very destructive to our relationship. In a blamer's eyes, everyone else is at fault except for themselves. And they find no reason to criticize their own actions, and everything becomes, outside of it. There's no introspective looking. When blaming becomes a real part of what we're doing, it becomes always looking and pointing the finger at someone else. So criticism's always there, usually judgment's always there, and it's always trying to shirk your responsibilities. The trouble is that it also rolls right down to our children from our marriage, if this is the habit that we have, right? They think everybody else needs to be fixed. You ever went to a service on a certain day and you're sitting there and the pastor gets up and he starts preaching, and as he's preaching you're thinking, man, I wish they were here. They really need to hear this. Right? You ever thought that? I wish that person was here. Not realizing that maybe you're here and you're the reason that somebody might be preaching and giving you that word. But we always try to think of how to fix others, and sometimes we're not looking at how to fix ourselves, and that's why blaming gets to be so big. So let's try a little test. You guys want to try a little test? I want you to answer these questions, and you can answer them out loud or keep them to yourself. We all know the deal, though, whether it's loud or out. Would it be normal for you to respond to someone with a problem by telling him why he is to blame for his problem? So someone comes to you with a problem, and you just begin to immediately tell them why they're to blame for that problem. I think that's probably a lot of people that do that. In relationships with friends and family, do you often find yourself pointing the finger? Do you tell others how and why they are wrong using phrases such as, you did it, or it's your fault, like the straight out things? You ever do that? All right, let's ask one more. When you confront difficulties or inconveniences, is it common for you to identify and ruminate over who is and what is to blame? Yes, that was pretty quick. Who said that? Just kidding. I didn't want you to raise your hand, but now we know Kevin a little bit deeper. That's good. Let's try this last question. When you are upset or in a difficult situation, do you frequently blame someone for making you feel the way that you do? So when you get angry, it's because of what you did to me that made me angry, and that's why I'm angry. Do you find yourself blaming other people in that way? Well, here's the deal. If you said yes to any of these questions, you're a blamer. If you answered yes to multiple questions, then your blaming behavior may very well be compromising your relationships. And that's where it really meets our lives in a very significant way, right? Blaming is a habit, and the first way to overcome it is to be aware of it and take some actions to break that. You know, our nation is becoming a victim mentality nation all around. Now, I want to separate something out here because I can already hear it. You know, there are true victims in this life who are being abused, and I'm not talking about that. All right? I don't want to say that victim mentality or being a victim is always bad. It's not. There are some people who are true victims of abuse, and we need to recognize that and get some help for those people. Is that clear? Did everybody get that? Is that okay? Hallelujah? At the same time, on trivial matters of daily life, of pressures, the things that we all face together, the things that we have to deal with, the things that we have to go through, our loads every day, our responsibilities, our tasks, a lot of times that's what I'm talking about. We're beginning to be a victim mentality all around to where we want to blame anybody and everybody for everything that's gone wrong and never take personal responsibility for our own actions and being the solution that we could be. Is it true? Do y'all see what I'm saying? Y'all think that's true? Let me get a little hallelujah if you think it's true. All right, good. That's about all of us. Pete Hamill said, victimism is what happens when we blame other people for our problems. Here's the deal. If we persist in blaming, then we won't take responsibility, and then ultimately we won't be healed. Don't play the blame game. Own it by name and avoid the shame, because that's what it does. So who do we blame? John Killinger tells about a manager of the minor league baseball team one time who was so disgusted with the center fielder's performance that he said, just get in the dugout. He assumed the position, the coach, himself. And the first ball that came out into center field, he took a bad hop and it hit the manager right in the mouth. The next one was a high fly ball which he lost in the glare of the sun, and it bounced off his forehead. The third was a hard line drive, and he charged it with an outstretched arm. Unfortunately, it flew right between his hands and smacked his eye. Furious, he ran back to the dugout, grabbed the center fielder by the uniform and shouted, "You idiot! You've got center field so messed up that even I can't do a thing out there." That's how it sounds so ridiculous sometimes when we're blaming others. And we can find so many reasons to blame everyone else, because if we do that, it makes us feel so much better, right? I mean, our reaction is crazy. Yahshua said in Matthew 5:29, if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And it seems like that's the place where we don't want to take the most responsibility. Yahshua was reminding us, you live your life, be proactive, do the things that I'm saying to you to do, but don't always focus on other people in a way to bring them down. And that is the ultimate success that we can have with blaming, is taking initiative and responsibility. So who are we blaming today? Well, you know, a lot of people, I believe, they blame Yahweh. Just like Adam, it's this woman you gave me. Or it's this situation that you put me in. It's these problems that I have. It's this whatever this is in your life that begins to make you feel the pressure or the stresses of things. And then you wonder why and how Yahweh created you this way, instead of trying to take some proactive ways in your life to overcome that. But a lot of people blame Yahweh for their problems, and they put it back on him. You know, it's this assembly you brought me to. If I just wasn't at this assembly, my life would be better. You know, there's a guy that came in and left one assembly. He said they weren't perfect like me, and he came into the next assembly, and he came in and he looking all shining, all dressed up, all looking nice. And when he walked in, the pastor looked at him and said, "Now we're not the perfect assembly because you showed up." Some people blame the devil. You know, it's true the devil is to blame for ultimately a lot of the situations that we have. However, I think he's getting a lot of credit for our own temptations. I think he's getting a lot of credit for our own bad habits and our bad attitudes. Don't you think? I think when we don't guard our own heart, and then we say, the devil made me do it, in some situations it's keeping us from disciplining and guarding ourselves appropriately. And then we put that blame, but it's so easy to say that, oh, it was something outside of me that was to blame, instead of trying to fix the heart problem that we have. Some of us blame our spouse. I know that none of you are like that, so I guess I'll just speak for myself. Sorry, that said Elise. I'm sorry. Blame our spouse. Anybody know who Lady Astor was? Well, let me tell you something about Lady Astor. She was the first American to hold a seat in Parliament in England. And one time they were having a discussion in Parliament back in the time that Winston Churchill was there, and they had this discussion about Adam, and I don't really know all the discussion around it, but I know that she stood up and she said, the first time Adam had a chance, he laid the blame on a woman. And she was talking about women's rights in the Parliament. And that was her take on Adam, is that all he did was lay the blame on there. She was also in there telling, she was always kind of like Winston Churchill and Lady Astor always had this thing going between them, right? And Lady Astor looked at Winston Churchill one day and she said, if I was your wife, Winston Churchill, I'd poison your tea. To which the Prime Minister responded, Madam, if you were my wife, I'd drink it. I do keep telling Elise she's got to get a handle on this for both of our sakes. Otherwise, our paradise is in jeopardy. But isn't that the way it is so often? We're just so quick to blame or throw something out. But I love Winston Churchill. He always has the greatest quotes. But I want to tell you about a time in my life that there was a phrase that changed my life. There was a time when Elise and I were doing really good at the beginning of our marriage. And then as the years went on and we got to a place to where just talking about certain issues became very toxic and very difficult. As we walked through that, I know that we both wanted to help solve this problem because we were both feeling the stress of it. And it was pushing us into a corner, and the more we got into that corner, it seemed like the tighter our relationship was getting. And at the end of it, we would walk away from a hard time that we were having, and in a few hours, we'd sit down and we'd talk with each other, and we'd say, we don't want it to go this way. But it was very difficult because the whatever the topic was that we were on, and honestly, I don't know what they all were anymore, except for I remember then it was like, this push and this pull, and it just kept getting harder and kept getting. But I remember as we were going through that, I began to hear this phrase over and over from her. And one of the things that I was realizing that is as we were going through this, I was hearing this hopelessness about our relationship in her voice. And what she said was, and I kept hearing this again, just seemed like it just came out. She says, I'm just not good enough for you anymore. The truth is, through that period of time, is our family was going through some different things with our children, with life, with other problems that we had. And I began to focus in wanting to change a few things in our home. And I wanted our life to go in a different way, and I wanted some of the things that we were dealing with to be less. But as we kept going through and it kept getting more tight and more tense, I just kept hearing that at the end of our conversations, and it was putting a hopeless feeling in my heart. And what it says is, I'm just not good enough for you anymore. So there was a period of time when I was doing well, and now it seems like you're not accepting me anymore. I really felt at that moment that, this is the place where people start wanting to get out of the relationship. That's kind of scary. But it happens to all of us in some ways. I don't know the depth of it for you. I don't know where it goes to. But one thing I did realize is that the way that Elise and I are, and as I began to study and I began to think, okay, we can't stay here. I have to do something. What I realized is that in my desire to make changes in my home, I began to put pressure in my words and our conversations of things that I wanted her to do. And I was pushing her to change. I was pushing her to change. I was pushing her to take responsibility. I was seeing something that she was doing or wasn't doing that was causing problems and something that I thought I was trying to solve. But the truth is I was pushing her into a corner. And in that corner, she was telling me that this is not the way to fix it. Somehow Yahweh put that in my heart, and we began, and especially me, I want to say, I began to change my interaction and tried to relieve that pressure. And it worked. Because I changed my focus. I've lived with the same woman, and she was really good. I remember when we were married, She was like heartbeat that I could feel. Like I saw her, met her, and then 3 years later I met her again because I went away to the Navy. And when I came back the second time, we dated for that week of the feast, went on a few dates, talked a little bit. And then when the feast was over, I knew that she was the one I was going to marry if she would say yes. That's how convicted I was up front. And then as I began to think about that again, going back to that first love and the things we were doing at the first and all of those things, I began to realize that I have a real treasure in my home and that I'm wounding her. And that's the way it happens. And this blame game is for serious business. I would love to say that that was 20 years ago, and we've been married 25, but it hasn't been so long ago. So it happens and it comes up on us if we don't make the right actions. It can happen to any of us at any time. What I found is that it's an easy pattern to fall into, but if you fall into that pattern, it will destroy your relationship. And it doesn't take very long for it to get really toxic. The long term of blame and the mentality, let me just ask you a question. How do you feel when someone blames you and you think you were not at fault? How did you feel? When someone blames you and you think you're not at fault, how does that feel? That feels bad, doesn't it? Feels crazy. We feel cheated. We feel betrayed. We feel like they're not understanding us. When someone blames you and you were at fault, how do you feel? Criticized. Yeah. Kind of feels bad. Even when you're at fault, when someone's blaming you, right? Even if you know that you're at fault, when someone's laying that on you, it doesn't feel very good, does it? When someone blames you and you think that you're just as much, if not more at fault, how do you feel? Let me say that again. When someone blames you and you think that you are just as much, if not more at fault than them, how do you feel? Anybody? Any difference? What's that? Sure, it gets a little confusing. My point is that when you feel that you're at fault more than the other person is at fault, you feel a little bit better than the other two. But they don't any of them feel good when blame's coming, right? But it is your attitude and is the way that you take that information that makes all the difference in the world. You know, blaming keeps people stressed and they withdraw and then they build up walls to escape the pressure. And that's what was happening between Elise and I. And it keeps us from moving forward with solutions to the problems. So what's the fix? In most cases, I think people don't realize that they're blaming so much. But as I began to think about this subject and began to, even preparing this, I started thinking of how am I blaming, How is it that I'm trying to get someone else to take responsibility for something I'm not doing? I think that we all are blaming a little bit more than we think we are because we can hear what other people are doing and we can feel them sometimes a lot easier than we can see or feel ourselves, right? Because we know exactly our motivations and our intentions, but in other people, we are putting their motivations and their intentions on them. So we see them a little bit better. So it's easier for me to blame my wife than it is for me to take responsibility. So just understanding that and saying that out loud and accepting that is half the battle, really, to start doing something about it. Wouldn't it be wiser if we took responsible action to help create a positive change in our lives and the world? Escaping the trap of blame, because it's so easy to blame other people's to do it. But if we want to stop blaming, then we have to ask better questions. I think that's a real key of why we're doing it and what's the motivation and what's the result that we're getting from it. When we give away our responsibility, and that's what happens when we blame others for things that we could solve. When we give away our responsibility, we're also giving away our freedom and our choices. So when we're telling someone, you're making me mad, then we're giving away our responsibility to not be an angry person. Right? Because we should have control over our emotions. The only way we can regain that freedom is to become responsible. Once we do that, we'll be in a whole better place to make a positive change. So accountability says, number one, look in the mirror first. If you agree with me that you and I blame others too often, then we need to commit to ourselves to deal with it without excuse. Ask yourself, in what ways do I use blaming as an excuse for not accepting responsibility? Someone said that people who are out to find fault seldom find anything else. I know the story of a guy that was going down to a city, right? And he walks up and he sees this wise guy sitting up on the hill as he's going to go down in there. And he says, sir, what do you think's in the city? He says, well, what do you think's down there? He said, well, I find that cities are pretty bad. People are living crazy lives, a lot of crazy things going on there, bad attitudes, bad actions, a lot of sin, a lot of temptation, a lot of everything else. He says, yeah, I guess that's probably true. So he goes down there, and then another guy comes by and he says, well, he asks the guy the same question. He says, well, what's the city? How's the city? He says, well, what do you think the people in the city are like? He said, well, I think that most people generally want the best out of life. I think people are doing good. I think they struggle, but they also want to overcome. And he said, that's probably what you're going to find down there. And I do think that's true. What we look into the heart to see is what we find, right? And if we're looking to find fault, I'm going to tell you, you'll find it everywhere, every day. Just make sure you don't delay looking in the mirror at yourself. Because it's so easy to point fault that we could do it every day, all the time. But pointing out fault doesn't solve a problem, does it? Brother Mike, do you agree with that as a pastor and an organizer in the local assembly? Do you think that there's faults here in your assembly? Yeah, do you think we could pick them apart if we wanted to? There's no doubt. Everywhere we go, this is going to be the truth. But that's not going to help us progress and move forward as a congregation or a family or a marriage, if that's all we do is pick fights. I think any fool can pick out the faults. But a wise person is the people that help move things forward. What can I do always works better than who should do this. What's within my power to do, even if others aren't doing well. This is a huge one. If you want to take away from this seminar, I would say that introspectively, that means looking inside yourself intently, find your triggers. Triggers are just things, phrases, or keys that begins to bring something out of your heart that's really bad, right? Find your triggers and then make a plan to minimize your emotions in this area, because if our emotions are left without restraint, they will begin to overtake us and bring us to bad places such as anger and criticism. Ecclesiastes 10:4 says, if a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. Is your trigger someone else's anger? Is your trigger someone's disrespect? For men, I think this is huge. I think when our wives disrespect us, that's a huge trigger. When our children disrespect us, it's a huge trigger for us to go into the crazy cycle, as Emerson Eggerichs talks about it. Kind of like the same cycle that James was talking about in his message. When we're disrespected, we begin to just unleash this thing in our heart because we're discontented with that. Is it lack of affirmation that is a trigger for you? Is it a trigger when people don't take responsibility for themselves? With my children, I think that's a huge trigger for me. When I asked them to do something, I come home and they're playing a video game and the thing that I asked them to do is not done. Dude, what's up? What are you doing? And then they're like, dude, I'm talking to you. Oh yeah, what's up? That trigger, that sends me over the edge. Adam, is that true? Adam's looking at me like, dang. Maybe it's even your own frustration. That's one of the things that I found when Elise and I were experiencing those really high problems is that I was so frustrated that I couldn't get my point across. I felt like I just couldn't get it, and it was just driving me, and that began to unleash a whole new set of things that were coming out, right? And sometimes it's right within our own heart that becomes a problem. So when you're frustrated, sometimes it's because you're not understood. You don't feel like you're being understood. You don't feel like that you're saying enough to get it, and it's like it just starts pushing this wedge out there. Maybe your trigger in my children, I know that it's not being treated fair. That's a real trigger for them. When they're not treated fair, you didn't treat them like that. Why did they get that and I didn't get this? And it's just like we're all in the same thing. So triggers are important for us to know what our own trigger is and then control that. One of the things I really like about Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs is he talks about this in detail for men. And he says you have to identify when your child is having an issue of their own heart and the words that they're using are that way, or it's also, you have to be able to discern when it really is disrespect. Because sometimes the words and the sound of both of those two things sound like disrespect to us. And like that little distinction makes a big difference in how we deal with whatever subject we have with our children. And we have to be wise to those patterns so that we can then lead them through it and lead them through their stuff. We don't want to put everything on them that we're dealing with as well. How many of you know people that build a case against their spouse? They don't let it go. I mean, every time we get to this fight, it's like, okay, well, I remember when you did this, I remember this, August 2nd, you did this, and you said this, and I responded this way, and then you told me this, and now you're saying that it's not. Is that really true? You know, it's easy to fuel a fire with all kinds of proof of your spouse or other people's character flaws, but again, we all have flaws, so it's not going to be hard to do that. But it isn't something that helps us to do. Case building is a huge problem in any relationship. Sometimes when you have just a little situation to deal with and then you get this unleashing of all these wrongs that have happened through the last 25 years, you never deal with anything really well. And every negative action is taken into account. Even sometimes then funny or normal things can be taken out of context and they're projecting some kind of hidden intent, right? It's like if I don't take out the trash in the morning, if my wife asks me to do that, on a normal day it's okay, I just made a mistake. But if we had a fight before I left the house and I didn't take out the trash, then it's like, he did this against me. He did this because we were, right? And that's the way we think. So the more our relationship is in chaos, the more we put on other people. All right, so I want to warn you guys, be careful of spending your time with complainers. In a study that followed 173 people who graduated from Harvard in the 1940s, those who were most satisfied with their lives were those who handled life's blows without blame or bitterness. Here's the deal. If we spend all of our time with negative Nilly or venting Victor or Billy Blamer, we can become infected with the same debilitating disease. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, bad company corrects good morals. So accept responsibility to make your marriage better. There was a time when a couple was getting married, they were preparing to get married, and they both realized that they had a problem. But I'll always say that the truth is better than a lie. So they were getting married, they both know that they had a problem, and they didn't want to share it with anybody. The groom-to-be had very smelly feet, and he asked his dad for some advice. His dad told him to always wear socks to bed. No problem. The bride-to-be also had a problem. Told her mom that her breath was so bad in the morning that she was afraid her new husband wouldn't want to sleep in the same room with her. Her mom counseled her to never talk in the morning without first brushing her teeth. And they got married and everything went well for the first few months. They followed the same advice and it was doing good. Then one morning when the husband woke up to find that one of his socks had come off during the night, as he frantically searched the bed, his wife woke up without thinking to first brush her teeth, immediately asked, "What on earth are you doing?" And the husband gasped, "Oh no, you swallowed my sock." You know, the truth of who you are and the truth of who I am, flaws and strengths included, will come out of your heart. The truth of who you are will come out. Whatever you're trying to hide, whatever you're trying to keep down there, whatever you're not dealing with, sooner or later, if that's a tick that's in your attitude, or if it's a tick that's in your character, if it's a flaw that you're not taking care of, or you're not moving to change or to solve or to try, sooner or later it's going to come out. Better to embrace that negative habit or character flaw or something that's not right within you and put it on the table and begin to deal with it than to keep it hidden and wait till it comes out at an inconvenient time, usually through the stress or the problem or a situation. And then when it comes out there, it's so hard to deal with. Then you have to begin to start unpacking and going backwards. And I think, I guess what I see is that if we know that there's a pattern of behavior that we can identify, and then we can see the consequences on down the line of what that behavior or that pattern is going to bring us, then wouldn't it be better to correct it before it becomes the issue? Yes, but here's the thing. We're so lazy when it comes to dealing with our own selves. It's much easier to deal with other people because we have just the right advice for them, don't we? But have you ever been at that critical moment where you're telling someone something that's really profound and it sounds really good and you're like, I didn't even know I knew that. And then you have that other thought that comes in and says, but you don't act like that yourself. You're not doing your own advice. Have you ever had that feeling? I remember Elise and I would talk we did Marriage Ignited seminars with Keith and Amanda, so we had a lot of time to talk about issues of marriage. And there was one night we gave a message, and I won't tell you which topic or whatever it is, and I went home and with Lisa, we were talking about it, kind of breaking down how everything went. And I said, I don't even think I live according to that advice. I give that every time. I said, I think I got to tighten up my own ship, because I feel like every time I'm talking about that, the back of my mind is saying, you're a hypocrite, you're a hypocrite, you're a hypocrite, right? And I think that it takes things like that to get inside of our brain so that we find out our own hypocrisy and we don't take life so difficult, all right? Now, I want you guys to know that just for the record, there's 2 minutes and 39 seconds left up there. I don't have to rush for my last thoughts. I don't have to grasp for straws, see if it's going to come out right or wrong. I have now 2 minutes, 26 seconds left, and I just want to tell you, there's just a few takeaways that I would like for you to take from this message, all right? Here's the first one. Now, I don't want it to be too wordy. I didn't want it to be too big. I wanted you to really get it. But I didn't want it to be, I didn't want it to be like this long thing you couldn't. And I didn't want it to be so profound, but I just wanted to. Here's the deal, all right? Here's the first thing to do. First takeaway. Stop blaming others. Okay? I'll give you a chance to process that. Just stop blaming others. It's so simple. The second one is know your triggers. Know what sets you off. Know what gets you upset. Know what takes you from one place of peace to the place of chaos. Know your triggers. Know if it's disrespect or if it's a certain word or a certain phrase or something like that that's making you react in a negative way. And then if you know that trigger, then take some time to take charge of that part or that area of your life and then help your own spirit to relax. Put some kind of method or some kind of plan to guard your heart from unleashing that, whatever it is. And the last takeaway that I'd like for you to have is I would love for everybody to have a copy of this book, Question Behind the Question, because it's really a simple book on personal accountability, and I think it would make so much difference in little things as we go along. Just being able to say, what can I do to make it better? Instead of who's to blame for it not going well, who can I change because it's not going well? Because here's what I feel deeply within, as I've studied this out and looked at a lot of research on blaming and how it affects us, is that when you begin to take responsibility and you begin to show leadership and how something is supposed to be done instead of relying on someone else that isn't giving you the behavior that's needed, then you become the leader to show the way. And a good leader knows the way, shows the way, and goes the way. And that's how simple it is. Ask better questions. Is that all right? I want you guys to recover from this debilitating disease. I want next year to see and have some stories that says, okay, I took this advice, I did this, and it's working better for me, all right? So Yahweh bless you. Thank you again for letting us come here. We had a great time at the conference. I appreciate you being steady and staying here for Sunday, and we just really appreciate the heart of the assembly here, and we pray blessings on all of you. So, that's it.
All right. Thank you, brother. And the reason he's saying that about the time is because he typically goes over. And then the conference goes late, and everybody's frustrated, but it's not always your fault.
Yeah. Y'all see how easy it is to do that? I thought I was helping, but
yeah.
What's the trigger?
So I do have a question, and we can get maybe a couple questions from the audience as we continue here. Let's just say I'm asking for a friend.
Okay.
Someone close to you is coming against you, and they're blaming you for something that you're not responsible for. It's really probably their problem.
Yeah.
And you realize it, and they probably know it, but they're just saying it anyway. How can you respond to diffuse that thing without inflaming the situation and making it worse?
Well, I think that you have to realize that, as I've realized for sure when dealing with just situations like that where you feel like that it's not the right thing that's happening. So the cycle goes like this, is someone says something that you don't think is right, and then you begin to be defensive, and from that springs all kinds of things that a person could unleash. But if we want to stop that process, then we certainly have to guard our responses. And Yahshua was like a master at responses. You know, when the Pharisees came and asked him hard questions, he didn't always like get in their face. And I mean, sometimes he did if it was really too hypocritical, but a lot of times he would just ask them another question and that would throw them off their game. And so, you know, it's not always the goal to throw your spouse off her game or his game, but it certainly is to be in control of your responses. And to be in control of your responses, I find that you have to make some kind of a plan to do that. So if it's pretty toxic already, and every time you ask a question, you're just getting this defense all the time, then prepare for that. Don't think it's going to go away, and don't think that you're just going to say a phrase to make it go away. It's the crock pot, right? It's continually doing the right thing and then seeing a different result that comes out of that. And somebody has to stop all that chaos and begin to make an orchestrated plan to guard themselves. Then once that calm comes in, I believe if either spouse becomes more calm, then that leads to more calm. You know, it's like that scripture in Ecclesiastes that says, when you're calm and you stay doing what you're supposed to be doing where you're at your post, then I think that helps things calm down.
Yeah. And I think that this book, QBQ, is a great opportunity to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
How many, just raise your hand if in this room, let's have a moment of honesty, moment of transparency. Raise your hand if you're the biggest problem when it comes to the blame game. Just raise your hand. You blame others. All right, here we go. You blame others. You get QBQ today. How about that? Congratulations. You need to read that one. That's going to change your world. It changed mine. I stopped blaming Dwayne a long time ago.
So now, here's the deal. When you come to Family Builders Conference, we accept you flaws and all. If you're a blamer, we're going to give you a book.
That's right.
Right?
Okay, does anyone
So
in the
good.
audience have a question or a comment for Dwayne? We can take a couple real quick here, up front here. Well, I know, but I think they're recording this.
She's a shouter. I know that's right. That's what I was thinking. I
she's a
didn't want to
shouter.
say it, but since you did.
I'm just thinking in the family environment, I tend to fall into blaming when I'm trying to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing the problem, and I can see my responsibility in the problem, but I can see other people's responsibility as well. And they're not seeing their responsibility. So in order to solve the problem, how can you proactively get everybody involved without making them feel as though I'm blaming them in a negative way, but just helping them see you have a part to play in this too, and you're needed if we're going to solve this problem.
Responsibility.
Yeah, again, I'm just going to go back to that. We all see what you're saying. Like, I think that what you said is something that we all identify with. We do see our responsibility in it, but we also see people that may have more primary responsibility and they're not stepping up to that. And so I believe, like with our kids, like when Elise was doing her little skit yesterday, the way that we talk, like the tone that we choose and the words that we choose to either get them to step up to responsibility or to pound them down to feeling like they're not doing well at all, that's a big struggle of mine. So just remembering to be supportive and to try to know that I'm raising someone who I want to be better, not trying to curse someone who's not doing well. That's a big thing. We tend to lay a lot of baggage on people when we don't see it going. So if we're irritated, then that irritation comes out really good. And by the way, I was talking to some young people one time, and there were like a whole bunch of youth together, and I was like, well, tell me one thing that your parents do that makes you really mad. And one of these young ladies stood up and said, I hate it when my parents are mad at one child, and then I ask them for something, and they give me the unleashing that they gave the other one, and I was innocent. I didn't have anything, right? And as I thought about that, I thought, man, we do that so often, and it's really true, you know, and they want to be treated a certain way. So it's at the heart of the way that you present things and the way that you do it. I don't really have a great answer, but I can tell you that Emerson Eggert's book, the Love and Respect in the Family, really helps the idea of talking in your words and the things James was talking about, choosing the right tones and words. Mm-hmm. They're really important.
Elise has got a comment right behind there, please, and then we'll come to the back row there.
Hello? Okay. So to address Tara, maybe it would help if you don't, tell them what they did wrong. Like, you did this wrong, but say instead, hey, let's fix this, and what could we do right? And that kind of helps. Instead of blaming, we're like, okay, we need to fix it. Let's not focus on the wrong action. Let's focus on what the right action is instead. My comment was, I love in the movie Facing the Giants, there's a quote, and the coach is telling the player, and he says, "Stop judging others by their actions and yourself by your intentions." So it helps to give people grace when you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Okay, we've got the back row here.
Thank you for coming and addressing a lot of issues that our families in this world today are. The family structure is under attack and is a casualty of war. But she kind of stole my thunder. As I'm been in listening to these talks, my mind has gone to some of the movies that the Baptist Church produced. Like, for example, The Blame Game with the flywheel. Grief with Facing the Giants. The one this morning with Fireproof and Courageous and stuff like that. I'm seeing exactly what the examples that you've pointed out that are very common in our lives, and how not to do what the world teaches us to do, but to do what Yeshua would do and react, and how he wants our families to be set apart from the rest of the world, and for our children's families to benefit from that, not to strive for excellence in our families the way that Yeshua designed our families to be.
Mm-hmm. That's true,
Yeah,
for
thank you.
sure. We need that blessing
think,
all we can get.
Elder Mike had to comment, and then we'll come up to the front row.
Well, Elise kind of answered it. I manage a lot of people, and trying to get people to work together is always a challenge. And it seems like when there's an issue, the first reaction is blame. And so, as she pointed out, as I get the teams together, I'm not interested in who was at fault. I'm just interested in the solution, because we can't change the past. So let's work together. What do we need to do, to prevent it from happening again? It's simple advice, but what's the point in finding fault? I mean, there's no good side. There's no advantage to that. The only thing we need to focus on is, hey, what's the solution? And just those words right there, tends to set people at ease. And now you can begin to build the relationship to come up with the solutions you need. So just a simple principle.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, up here we'll take one or two more.
Yeah.
Up here
I'll tell you a story that was really quick, but there was a pilot, I think it was Rockefeller, who took off one day. He had his plane service. He took off. He came back in. When he got flying up there, as soon as he got take off, he got a little ways in the air. His plane started sputtering, and the engines all died. So he got back on the ground, and when he got down on the ground, they did an inspection of the plane and realized that the person that fueled it up put the wrong fuel in. And so when he went up, it was doomed from the beginning. And it says that he walked over to that guy and he says, "Well, I appreciate you working on my plane, and I know you're never going to do that again, so I don't think we have anything else to talk about." And I thought, could you do that? I mean,
He crashed that plane.
He did? Oh, well, the stories aren't good off the cuff sometimes.
No, but it's the same. I mean, he crashed.
Okay.
Survived.
Yeah, so there you go. So I thought, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't think I would have reacted that way. I feel like a little bit like Mike. That guy did really good. He got some human relations principles going on. Yeah. Go ahead, sister.
First of all, I want to thank you very much for your talk. I know immediately before you said, have you ever felt like, this talk is really good. I wish that certain person was here. I was thinking, well, my husband is here, and I really hope he's paying attention right now. And
There's
I'm really
some raw
proud of him that
honesty
he
for
raised
you.
his hand and he got the book.
His hand, he's already admitted, and you're still driving the knife in.
This is marriage.
Man.
That's really my fault, though, not his own. And I had a comment that was really powerful to me, speaking to your point that we find what we're looking for. When you set out to find fault, you will always find it. And for my sister, when she was newly married, and her husband would do anything like put the dishes in, just leave them in the sink instead of rinse them and put them in the dishwasher. How hard can that be? Every time she would find something like that, she would say, "You hate me, don't you?" Even when he wasn't there. And she said, and that just, I realized, was at least as much of a problem as what he was doing that was frustrating me. And the same with the words talk, that was reaffirming to her out loud. And she said, so without expecting anything different from him, I just decided that every time I saw that, every time I got the urge to say that, I would say, "You love me, don't you?" And she said, and it completely turned her perspective around when she was seeking that out. And his actions didn't really change, not right away, but she was so much more appreciative and saying, but you know what? I do know he loves me. I know this is a stupid little thing that he probably didn't think about, but overall, he does love me. So that just reminded her. And I don't know, I felt like that was really impactful. And she loves being able to tell that story that she survived through that. So thank you. It's really true and plays out.
Yeah, even what you're saying there, I think, is a little talking of itself. I mean, when we use the right words, even if we don't feel the right words, if we use the right words and we keep using the right words, it does change our attitude. Kind of fake it till you make it is true. Standing in front of the mirror and saying that you have value in Yahweh's eyes, if you're having an image problem of your own, really does bring value to the way that your attitude is, and reminding yourself that he does love me, although I'm not seeing a good action. Then once that begins to de-escalate, then it makes the other person feel a lot more free too, and brings out good things in their heart. So yeah, that's a good topic for next Family Builders.
Yeah, because along that line, you were talking about the seeing, the heart of the other person, and one thing that one of the main things that I got away that was positive from network marketing was they wanted you to stop talking negativity. So they said, after everything you say, follow it up by saying, "And that's what I want." You always leave the dishes in the sink, and that's what I want.
Right.
Or you never pick your socks up off the floor, and that's what I want.
Right.
And it
It
shows
does
you
change your attitude because because it's a control statement.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what I was expecting. That's what I.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's crazy how those little things can be very valuable. Yeah. I believe our self-talk in relationship is so important, but it's something we spend so little time talking about, because the rumination process inside of our hearts is really a strong demon, I think, especially when things are going wrong. It can be a really great tool if it's going right, but if your talk is always inside of you, that's something that's you don't like yourself or you don't like others around you, then that self-talk will come out of your heart, because that's what's in your heart.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's appreciate Dwayne, and thank you so much for bringing that topic to us. Yeah.